For years, the deadlift has been touted as the king of exercises for building muscle and strength. In this video, we're going to break down how and why the deadlift fails at giving you the best bang for your buck for your muscle growth endeavors, and how we can fix the deadlift so you can get more out of your workouts. So the first thing we can do is break down the deadlift and analyze if it does a good job of developing any muscle or giving a good muscle growth stimulus. But before we do that, we have to define what a good muscle growth stimulus is. So with all the latest research coming out on long muscle length training and tension at a lengthened position, I'm pretty confident in saying that a good exercise provides stability, sufficient load, takes the muscle group through a sufficient range of motion, and has a high degree of tension when that muscle group is at a relatively long length, and maybe spends a majority of the lift in that proportion, as well as provides a good eccentric stimulus. So let's go through several muscle groups that the deadlift is supposed to train well and analyze how the deadlift falls short at developing these muscle groups. Number one, being your posterior chain. So we'll start with the spinal erectors. And while yes, it may be a potent spinal erector stimulus, it's an isometric contraction. And after a while, that isometric contraction is not going to be enough to continue to develop your spinal erectors. Now, this is not a problem for many people as they're not looking to develop their spinal erectors directly. But if you really wanted to get thick, juicy spinal erectors that run up your back like cables, then you're gonna have to train your spinal erectors directly. So that looks like spinal flexion and extension on a sufficiently loaded machine. Now, moving on to the glutes. This is the one muscle group that the deadlift may provide an okay stimulus for. There's typically a good enough range of motion. It's harder at the bottom, so when the glutes are in their lengthened position, but the deadlift fails to give you that eccentric stimulus, and it arbitrarily cuts the range of motion short because you're limited by your limb lengths and the diameters of the plates before they run into the ground. So glutes, maybe, but besides that, it's downhill. Moving on to the quads. It is a quarter squat pattern at best, and most people deadlift with their posterior chain. So even though you're only doing 10 to 20 degrees of knee flexion, that really is not enough to stimulate the kind of muscle growth we want to see, especially when you look at the amount of fatigue that you're accruing through doing a big compound lift like a deadlift and not getting much muscle growth stimulus out of it. I think the best way to describe the deadlift is a jack of all trades is a master of none. And that's a saying that really applies to this lift. And unfortunately, it's been conveyed as being the go-to solution for beginners, intermediates, even some advanced people to unlock their gains. Now let's look at the hamstrings. So most people, when they deadlift, I know for me personally, back in my conventional deadlift days, granted they were fun, but I never felt sore in my hamstrings. I never got through with a set of deadlifts, even if it was for higher repetitions. I never said, wow, my hamstrings really just feel like they are wrecked. And when you look at it, during the deadlift, you're both flexing the knee and extending your hips. The hamstrings are actually staying in a relatively similar length. That means during the movement, they're not changing much. And we've seen this through studies where they look at hamstring growth during squatting patterns. The conventional deadlift essentially is a modified squatting pattern, and the hamstrings really just don't receive enough stimulus because they cross both the hip and the knee. So when you're lengthening and shortening at both of those positions at the same time, the hamstrings are staying the same length, and therefore you're not getting the muscle growth stimulus that you're looking for out of the movement. Now this one, unfortunately, man, I don't know where this is coming from. Probably the enhanced side of bodybuilding. But deadlifts grow your lats. This is probably one of the worst arguments that I've heard in a long time. The lats, they perform shoulder extension. When you look at the range of motion and the amount of load in the moment arm that the lats have to act during the deadlift, it is basically zero. You're looking at a very sub-maximal isometric contraction at best, and that's just to keep the bar in a good spot, and that comes naturally from bracing. I'm basically doing that right now as we speak. I can contract my lats, but no one is arguing that that's gonna blow up my back. Same thing with the deadlift here. Just because your lats have some muscle activation does not mean you're growing muscle from the movement. Next up is rhomboids. Same thing. Even though you're isometrically contracting your shoulder blades back, it's not really providing you enough of a growth stimulus to benefit from that movement. Traps do have some growth potential from deadlift. There is an extreme weighted stretch component to conventional deadlift, whereas at the top, your upper traps are getting a lot of stretch as your shoulder blades are kind of pulled down and you're stretching out all of that upper trap area. But in reality, this is also just another isometric contraction. And even if you were deadlifting for traps, that's a whole lot of fatigue for a subpar trap stimulus. So as we discussed earlier, an eccentric component to a movement, that is the lowering phase, or when the muscle is lengthening during the movement, is very important for muscle growth. We've seen that across numerous studies now, spanning decades. So in the conventional deadlift, unless you're a psycho and doing eccentrics on conventional deadlifts, which very few people are, there is no eccentric. And so you're missing out on a major growth component in a movement. Another thing about the conventional deadlift is that it's typically not done in a hypertrophic rep range. So a lot of these kind of 5x5 purists, starting strength, and people like that saying that this is all you need to do to build the physique you want, they're typically doing 5 reps or less in the deadlift, which ironically is the range where we start to see that you don't really get much hypertrophy from a set below 5 reps. And so deadlifts, because they're so systemically fatiguing and fatiguing on a cardiovascular level, we really don't have people doing deadlifts in the 8, 10, 15 rep range. And even if you were, you're not failing at any particular muscle group. You're failing because systemically you're not able to produce enough force to overcome the movement again, or you're out of breath, which is what your boy would be, because Lord knows, cardio is not happening around here, right? Don't want to kill the gains, bro. And as much as the stimulus to fatigue ratio has been memed lately, I really think that it's applicable here, because when you look at just how much fatigue a set of deadlifts gives you, I remember back when I was deadlifting pretty frequently, I could do 3 sets of deadlifts and I was basically in a pseudo depression for the rest of the day. I just felt wiped out. I didn't want to do anything from such a small amount of sets and reps. And when I look at my physique after that, I was like, man, nothing is changing. I might have some joint pain here and there, but my muscles aren't getting much out of this movement, and I was in the gym to grow. I was in the gym to build muscle, as I think a lot of you out there are, but we've kind of sold on this lie that these strength movements are what is going to build you the most muscle. And in reality, it's just not the case. Another consideration is a time investment. So that stimulus to time ratio, again, the deadlift takes a long time to warm up for. And in between sets, it takes a long time to rest for a relatively small growth stimulus and very few sets and reps overall. So you could go in and do, let's take that example, 3 sets of conventional deadlifts, and that could take anywhere from half an hour to 45 minutes. If you really think that you're getting the most out of your time in the gym from a muscle growth perspective, doing 3 sets in 45 minutes, we could be doing a lot better and choosing exercises that train the muscles that we want to grow in a more efficacious fashion. So I don't want this to be another video out there on the internet trashing the barbell lifts just because people have been doing it for a long time and now we want to be contrarian and provide something new and novel. I really think that most people aren't getting what they want out of the conventional deadlift. And there's a big culture around it. For whatever reason, either because it's tough or it's hardcore, bro. If we really step back and look at what builds muscle, we can just make a few minor tweaks to our program to make the deadlift a little better and target the muscles that we actually want to grow. So for example, Romanian deadlifts for the win. I do exclusively RDLs now if I'm doing any deadlift variation. And it's because it provides you a great eccentric, takes the hamstrings through an awesome range of motion. It's length biased, and it really is not as fatiguing as the conventional deadlift because the load that you can use on an RDL is significantly less than what I could at least, conventional deadlift. And for the love of God, if you want to grow your lats, please just do some vertical pulls, bro. Do some pull-ups. It doesn't have to be the optimized virgin iliac pull down. Even though I think there is a place and time for that exercise, and if you try it, it feels great on your lats. Just do some basic vertical pulls, and it's really going to get you the most bang for your buck for your lat growth. Overall, I think the conventional deadlift is a fun and okay movement to have in your program. Granted, I did it for the first 2 years of my lifting experience, and I enjoyed going in and deadlifting because it felt hard and it was something I looked forward to. So if that's you out there, I'm not saying exclude deadlifts from your program. I believe that if you enjoy lift, it should make your lifting rotation. What I would do is just shift the frequency and maybe the amount of that lift that you're doing. So if I were doing it, I probably wouldn't deadlift more than once a week and 3 sets if your goal is muscle growth. If you're a strength athlete and you really care about your deadlift performance, then by all means, program the deadlift as frequently as you want and go crazy. But if you just want to grow some muscle and you're in the gym to look better, I think your time would be much better spent doing some of the exercises that we discussed today, doing some direct arm work, some forearm work, and really getting the most out of your physique by maximizing your exercise selection and not just being so reductionist and focusing on the deadlift as the one lift that is going to grow everything you want to grow. So guys, that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give me a like and subscribe. I would really appreciate it and look forward to seeing you in that next video.